It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Steve Smith, who's the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Exeter, to open our conference.
Well, good morning, everyone, and very, very warm welcome to all of you. I've got a speech. There's a few figures in it. I apologise. At this time of the morning, there's a few facts. Never let facts spoil an argument. What I want to do, though, is to get through it as quickly as I can, because I do think the most useful thing on these occasions is when we get a chance to talk. So my aim will really be to do 20 minutes and have 10, 12 minutes for questions. So welcome to Exeter. As you may notice, there's some filming going on. Simon was going to steal the line. There's some filming going on just over there where they've turned off Forum Building into Wessex Police Station and County Court, because the university is filming, is one of the places where they're filming the second series of Broadchurch. And yesterday, quite a lot of people on the floor I work on had an urgent reason to go down to the Forum to do things, and they kept coming. I mean, I don't know a single woman who isn't at the moment currently here in love with David Tennant, and they kept saying, I met him, I was that far. I mean, it doesn't happen with vice-chancellors, I can assure you of that. In a way, though, the Forum's quite a good starting point for two reasons. Firstly, the producers of the programme said to us, look, old chap, could you stop these student chappies and staff chappies tweeting or using this thing to tell us that we're here, because we don't want anyone to know that we're filming Broadchurch in the university. So, of course, we were just saying, Simon, it's trending on Twitter. The notion that you can evade media is absolutely impossible. But the second thing is that, in a way, the Forum Building, which you'll see in quite a lot during your time, is really a clever development, nothing to do with me, obviously, by definition, but it was a development to put students at the heart of what we do. And that sounds a glib phrase, and indeed it is a glib phrase. But we place extraordinary emphasis on the relationship we have with the students, and especially with the Guild of Students, which is the body that, that represents students. So it's very important to us that, firstly, the Guild is we have a committee called Budget Scrutiny Committee, whereby the Guild and us discuss where all additional fee income is spent, which is kind of dangerous. We ask them what they want. And they said something this year that we didn't agree with, but we did it, because that's what they want. They wanted 8 million spent on sport. So we spent it on sport. I'd have spent it on academic provision, but I mean, that's me. So we've got Budget Scrutiny Group, and the Guild gets involved in the decisions that we make. That's the first point, I think, to stress. But the relationship is incredibly strong, because candidly, we can't become the kind of institution we want to be without listening to the student voice. So student participation is absolutely central to what we're doing here at the university. And one of the results of that is that in the National Student Survey, which drives much of what we do, we always do pretty well, always in the top 10. And I suppose the big point I want to land today, and I'm going to end with 7 kind of conclusions of where I think things are going in the sector. But the big point I want to land is, of course, what happens academically matters, but also increasingly what happens within what you could call professional services matters enormously to the student satisfaction. I personally, every year, sit down and read all the comments they write on student satisfaction, the NSS forms. There's thousands of them, 4,260 last time. Some of them, of course, about useless lecturers. Some of them are about brilliant lecturers. But a surprising number are about individuals and services that are not in the academic realm. Literally, I quote, "The cleaner saved me because she was concerned for my welfare when I was down. I'd like to thank the staff who staffed this particular post in student services." So for Exeter, although I'm sure we don't do it properly and completely, but there's a realization that there's the professional services and the academic side, and the two together are absolutely core to making sure that we deliver the student experience that our students need. We've spent a lot of money on it, and different institutions here will have different amounts you've spent. The accurate figure for Exeter is our turnover is 306 million this year, but in the last 4 years and the next 2, we're spending 650 million on our infrastructure, including 92 million in our learning and teaching estate across the 3 campuses that we've got. And we're spending a lot of money on upgrading learning, teaching and study spaces. For the forum was 48 million. We've got £10 million building on our Cornwall campus, where I'm off to immediately after giving this talk. That's the Exchange building, which brings together student services, library facilities, etc. in that campus. I think we've done well on that, but the second big point to land is student expectations are enormous. After all, they're coming out of a school system where there's been a massive amount of PFI investment. In Exeter, for example, all the schools are under 10 years old, all the secondary schools. So they come to us, and some of our buildings don't look, to be polite, under 10 years old. And therefore, there's always more of a demand. We've now, at the moment, got a project of about 10 million for upgrading existing spaces on this campus. And just opposite us, there's a new development called Living Systems, which is a £52.5 million development on STEM research. So we've done a lot of work on estate. We're also quite innovative on learning methods. We were one of the first partners to sign with FutureLearn, and we've got a major MOOC running at the moment. It's just finished, actually. Professor Tim Lenton in our College of Life and Environmental Sciences has run a MOOC on climate change, and more than 16,000 signed up and 7,000 finished. That's incredibly different to by the way, the data I get seen at UK recently, you'll all know much more about this than I. The standard MOOC student is 44 years old, is male, lives in the United States and has a college degree. So the challenge of what it was going to be is slightly different to the reality. We're running a new one from next September called Discovering Business in Society, which is sponsored by the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. We also have tried to develop new learning methods for the summer term. We run something called Grand Challenges, which runs annually, promoting large societal challenges. I ran one in the first year on my area, which is international relations. We get all these fantastic external speakers, and that's gone well, but I'm not going to lie to you, participation is not wonderful, and there's a real issue for us there. We think, and more importantly, parents think, that students should be doing something in the summer. Unfortunately, we run up against something called reality, which is what students think. And their view, sunshine, nice weather, warmth, no lectures. Is it the beach? Is it Grand Challenges? Tough one. So there's some issues about how we reconfigure our teaching year. So we're into MOOCs, we're into Grand Challenges. It is quite galling to me. I had a letter over the weekend from a parent. I've had 2 letters from parents in the last 3 days. One said there aren't enough books in the library. You may have heard that one somewhere before. And the other one said, there's nothing for my daughter to do in the 3rd term. And I write this letter back saying, there's this thing called Grand Challenges, which I am on. And, did she sign up? I bet she didn't. So one of the issues is how we adjust to, and what's coming through, I hope my early comments, massively rising student expectations, most in England, but by definition increasingly in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So our aim really has been to try and get our landscape, both our teaching and our physical landscape, into a situation whereby students want to come here. Because one of the themes I'm going to develop in the rest of my comments is it's an enormously competitive market. But of course we took a hit. When we built the forum, which was next to, right, adjoins the library, we dropped to 60th place in student satisfaction with learning resources. That hit us. We're back up to 18th now. But, you know, the trouble is, if you try and do these things, you've got to balance the needs of future students with the requirements of current students. So we're going to keep this investment going. But if there's the next key point for me is there are massive issues emerging for universities over where we get the capital to do that. And that is actually, on the senior team and the governing body's view here, that is a major problem. So look, what I'm going to do is not tell you about technology, because I think I'd be way out of my depth in this audience. But what I thought I'd do is talk about two main themes that are emerging in higher education, then give you some quick summaries of where I see things, and then ask you to give you a chance to ask whatever questions you want. Let me just make one obvious point. I cannot overemphasize the importance of networks like yours and events like this. Vice-Chancellors, when we go to our conferences, a number of things happen, some of which are repeatable. But the major thing is we network, we talk, we compare what's happening. Sure, we're in competition, but the truth is we're facing similar challenges. And the real value of Vice-Chancellors' conferences isn't the guest speakers, although some of them are just wonderful. It's the sitting in the bar, sitting in, having a coffee, talking about what the challenges are, how we're dealing with it. So I completely support conferences such as this. I'm personally delighted that you've chosen to come to Exeter. I know that Jill and Elaine and others have done a lot of work to support you, but it really is important for us because we need to listen and find out what's happening. And in a way, that's the same for any part of professional services. So, two things to talk about. I thought I'd talk about public policy and spending environment. And secondly, I thought I'd talk about application trends. I think both of these, for all of you, whichever part of the UK you're in, are just massively significant. They are the elephants in the room. They are the context. So let's talk, first of all, about the state of public policy. Just make 3 or 4 big points. First point to make on this is the UK does extraordinarily well. There's dozens of figures I could give you. I'm just going to pull out 3 or 4. So higher education is the 7th largest export earner for the UK, worth 10.2 billion a year. UK universities, we think this will rise, for UK universities, it will rise to about 17 billion by 2025. That will have doubled since 2008. Which other parts of the UK economy have doubled export earnings in that period is an interesting question. Russell Group universities alone have an economic output of 30 billion. In fact, there's a nice piece of research came out by a research group hired by the Russell Group recently, which showed that the 24 Russell Group universities will spend more than 9 billion on capital projects from 2012 to 2016, which is roughly the same as was spent on the 2012 Olympic Games. Mammoth development. To give you an idea here, those of you who live in Exeter or know Exeter, mammoth excitement, not just David Tennant and Olivia Colman, but also the fact that John Lewis opened recently in Exeter, which rather embarrassingly got more mentions in job interviews when I asked the question, what attracts you to Exeter, than I'd kind of expected. And the local community goes on quite rightly about how wonderful John Lewis is. But the interesting thing is, from 2009 to 2016, the University of Exeter will spend 39 John Lewises in building. It's an incredible figure. And for many of your universities, it's the same. And by the way, if you want another big point, all universities are expanding. If you look at the latest data, it's not public yet, but the investment in infrastructure, in learning spaces, in tech, is just accelerating away to meet the demands of the new market. But of course, austerity is real. Public spending has been limited. It's limited in a number of key ways. But just to give you one lovely example, as you know, 2 months ago, the UK economy got back to where it had been in 2007-8. In that time, China has grown by 67%. So we got back to where we were, 0, or 100, whichever way you base it. In that time, China had grown by 67%, India by 39%. That's the competition that we're facing. Lots of debate about it, but one key figure, which has recently been challenged, but the CBI figure, is that 82% of new jobs from 2010 to 2020 would require graduate level skills. And the nice figure that I like, in 2010, the top 10 in-demand jobs for graduates were in industries that didn't exist in 2004. So and this is a real challenge for you guys, we're preparing our students for jobs that have not yet been created in industries that really haven't been conceived of yet. So there's a massive challenge in the environment in which we're operating. If you want the other big fact for me is that actually it's innovation, it's knowledge-led jobs that drive the economy. Nesta estimates that 2/3 of productivity growth in the UK comes in the last decade has come from knowledge and innovation-based jobs. If you took job losses since the recession, nice little fact for Exeter, the University of Exeter has employed more staff, additional staff, since the recession started than all other industries in the city have lost. And that's the same for a lot of your areas, a lot of your regions. Universities are massive employers. 86% of the job losses since 2008 were in service and manufacturing, only 2% in knowledge-intensive jobs. So there's a direction to history here. So that means, for a very big conclusion, the future of the UK has to be as a knowledge economy, but we don't spend much on it. I mean, some of you will know the figures. This is, if you want, the topic of a different lecture, but the malaise of the UK is based upon our research and development investment. UK used to spend about 1.8% of its GDP on R&D. It now spends 1.72. It's gone down this year, or last year, which is the data just released. The OECD average is 2.06. People turn around and they say it's not much different. 1.72, 2.06. But of course, as you'll realize immediately, it's 20% less. We spend a lot less on R&D. On our university systems, we spend 1.4% of GDP. The US spends 2.8. The OECD average is just over 2. So we really don't invest much in that economy, which for me is central to the futures. But for that, the UK gets an incredible output. The UK is 21st on spend in the OECD on higher education, but second on output. First is the United States. Bang for buck, the UK gets a lot more than you would expect. We get double the percentage of high-cited research papers than you would expect. So we get 200% of the amount you would expect us to get for the number of publications we publish. We're the second largest destination for international students. So the sector's doing incredibly well. But the challenges are just enormous. And this is the depressing bit, so if you want to, you can have a little sleep. The number one, of course, is what's going to happen to fees. Fees fixed at 9,000 maximum, fixed in 2012. And if you just take a very simple view, and for international colleagues, this may be helpful. So what are the four big income streams for this university? 149 million fees, of which about 90-something is home at the moment. 80 million research, 20 million QR, and 22 million funding council block grant. The really interesting thing, with the exception of international student fees, which has its own dynamic, all of those used to rise with inflation, and all of those are currently not rising with inflation. Research funding fixed from 2010 at 4.6 billion. Student fees fixed 9K. I think, until the end of the next Parliament. So here's the point. 2012, fees were worth 9,000. GDP deflator, work it out, run it through. By 2020, from memory, it comes to 7,161. So you've got a big issue there that fees and income look fixed. The difficulty, of course, then, is you've got whoever wins in next May's general election, they're facing enormous fiscal constraints, and the best bet we've got is that there have to be cuts of around, there's two estimates going around from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and the range is between 14.6 and 30.2% cut in the funding for the department in which we sit, Business, Innovation and Skills. So, Research Council, QR fixed as a pot, fees UK fixed, and cuts coming in the biz budget. In addition to that, student fees, as you know, all of you, my special subject, if I was ever on Mastermind, would be the RAB charge. The RAB charge stands for Resource Accounting and Budgeting. It's the charge, it's the amount we don't receive back from the student loans that we make. Currently, when fees were introduced, government estimated they would be 29p in the pound. Current estimate's 45p. At 50p, at 48.6p in the pound, it then becomes more expensive than the old system in England. And at 50p, the spending gets reclassified from being private spend off balance sheet to public spending, which has a massive hit on the public finances. Prediction, whoever wins in 15, there's a review of student support. And by the way, that'll affect the institutions in this audience very differentially. Because one argument is, shouldn't universities pay some of the costs of the unpaid bit of the loans that advance to students? No one knows the institute, of course, this means you could work out the institution's RAB charge. So Exeter students would pay, roughly so much off, Derby students would pay off Y. And the really nasty question that you don't want to think about is what's the range? And let me just give you a nice question. Do you think the range, if the average is 45, do you think the range is 40 to 50? Do you think the range might be 10 to 80? You can see the point. So massive changes coming, and thus a lot of threats really to the funding environment. Labour, of course, have got a great policy in the wings. The current policy, yet to be confirmed, but I think it will be, is they'll reduce fees to 6,000. This goes down very well with focus groups. We feel your pain. Unlike those Tory toffs, we're going to freeze energy prices, and we are going to we're going to ask you only to pay 6,000 fee for your son, daughter to go to university. Unfortunately, they then say, and we'll promise to make up the money to universities. And I think it's fair to say one of the greatest risks to this and any other university is, of course, they can't do it. Because they've agreed they're going to keep just Tory spending limits. And where exactly in the hierarchy of spend do you think universities fit compared to the health service, compared to schools, compared to defence, law and order? So there's a real issue. I was on a commission last year that looked at this, which said, as of then, Labour would need to find 1.67 billion a year extra to make up the difference. The Tories are now saying, and some of the evidence indicates that's drifting up to nearer 3 billion as the third cohort of students come through. Where do you find 3 billion? Well, there's the biz budget, but the biz budget's only 13.2, of which 10.6 is higher education. So you can make it up, but you take it from the rest of higher education. So really big issues here. And that means, where do we get the capital to build our buildings? Where do we get the capital to spend on learning resources? That's one set of pressures. Second set of pressures, student applications. Two aspects to this. The first one is fairly obvious. Do you remember, I was President of UK when the riots happened over fees. It was extremely bloody and bumpy. And everyone predicted that what would obviously happen is the rise in fees would actually see a decrease of students. Of course, the interesting thing is that's not actually happened. For one reason, students are a damn sight more intelligent than some of the people who are commentating. Let me give you a rather controversial comment. If I offered you a mortgage for your house on the same basis as the fee loan system here, you'd grab it. Pay it off at less than you used to pay per month, and after 30 years, if you haven't earned enough, we forget the debt. What this has led to, of course, is a massive rise in student demand for universities, especially amongst the poor. And the data are absolutely incredible. So I'll give you some of the figures. Students from the poorest group are now 94% more likely to apply to university than a decade ago in England, 69% more likely in Northern Ireland, 65% more likely in Wales, and 108% more likely in Scotland. So it is very difficult to say that fees have led to a decline. In fact, if you take the latest data for 2013 entry, the key point is that more and more students from poor backgrounds are going to university than ever before. But the problem case is emerging with young men. Here's a nice figure for you. 18-year-old women in England are more likely to be admitted to university than 18-year-old men are to apply. In educational standards, 18-year-old women achieve level 3 at exactly the same rate as men achieve level 2. There's a very deep issue there about men and the lack of educational performance. So I think the outcome is, the first point then is that kids from poor backgrounds are much more willing to go to universities than before. In fact, the cohort who were at 18 in 2012, the 18s in 2012, the 19s in 2013, that cohort were more likely to go to university than the cohort who were 18 in 2011. And that's a really counterfactual point. Everyone thought it would be the other way around. The other point I wanted to make, which is really straightforward, was the needs of students are changing massively. Michael Barber wrote this famous piece last year, An Avalanche is Coming, saying universities would be swept away by the demands of students. They want different things. And in a sense, I think that is a massive challenge. It links back to what I said earlier. They expect to be taught by people who are academics, not PhD students. They certainly expect their staff to turn up. When I was a student, if people didn't turn up, we went off to the pub. Now, if they don't turn up, they write to me. People feel they are, quote, paying for it. But the challenge in all of that, and then I'll move on to my conclusion, is that in 2011, 11% of capital spend was financed by universities themselves. This year, it's risen to 73%. So we are the organisations that have to pay for that development, and we have to adjust to what the modern student wants. Right, I'm going to wrap up very quickly. 7 bullet points. What are the challenges for you? This is the bit where you can wake up. Firstly, students expect a lot more in the 9K era than before. The campus has got to look and feel 9K. The tech has got to be 9K. The coffee's got to be 9K. The staff have to turn up. They have to mark it on time. And how do you deal with students who do definitely live in a different time frame to me? You know, our forum is more busy at 1 in the morning than it is at 1 in the afternoon. What does that imply, for example, for the sale of coffee? Should we adjust our staffing hours to that? Do you know that, you may know this from your own institutions, the 2-hour slot where most work is handed in on all our coursework is handed in electronically on eBart. What's the 2-hour slot when most coursework's handed in? 1 to 3 in the morning. What does that imply? What does that imply for our support services? So firstly, campuses have to look and feel across all services as if they are funded for the new environment. It's not just the teaching, folks. It's the coffee, it's the rooms, it's the heating, it's the portering, it's the gardens, it's the AV systems. There's a link called My Exeter is down. My Exeter is our portal. And if there's a problem, everyone goes onto the bloody link and talks about My Exeter. You know, we're paying for this is the standard refrain. Secondly, second big issue is where is capital coming from? And the obvious point is a lot of us are looking increasingly to massive savings in procurement. But more importantly, I think for us, public-private partnerships, which happy to talk about, but have some very good points, but also have to be polite, the challenges. So where do we get the money from? Third, and I think the most important point, and I think this will speak to every single person in the room, the biggest single challenge is institutions have to know their market position. Here's the joke. There are 48 British universities in the top 20, if you read their websites. Okay? There are 9 universities that are the leading post-92. So if you don't know your strengths and weaknesses, if you live on mythology about where you were, what your governing body thinks, what your bloody staff think, what your alumni think. When we got into the top 10, I had a series of letters from alumni saying, but I thought we always were there. You know, we've fallen. You were 4th when I was there. No, we were 34th. So one size fits all doesn't work, and you've really got to know what segment of the market you're in. 4th point, how do we deal with the relationship between the student as customer and the student as co-creator? So a student has a right, surely, to get their essay back on time. Do they have a right to a 2-1? I've had letters. I want a 2-1, I've paid for this. And that's an exaggerated form, but you see the point. 5th point, how do we adjust the work patterns of staff to respond to the needs of learners? Really big issue for us, massive issue for us. How do we, you know, I think 2 years ago, a lot of our direct employed staff, locally employed staff, certainly the direct labour staff, were employed on an 8 a.m. to 4:30 contract. Some massive issues here, and massive issues about how we take people with us on that. 6th point, regulation. One thing's absolutely clear, as government funds us less, they're going to regulate us more. We face a massive challenge from a kind of off-toff or kind of look at the Office of Fair Trading inquiry into universities. A lot of stuff about competition. So we are going to have more regulation. And that means more power in the hands of the people that pay, which are our graduates. That's a very different environment to our nice friends at the funding councils. And finally, how do we balance what we might call the destination university point, which is the Exeter view? You know, half of all students who get 3 A's at A level apply to Exeter. That's last year's figure. How do we apply that to people who are going to need very different forms of learning, going to need very different forms of technology? So how do we meet the expectations of technology very savvy, literate students, whilst preserving the essential features of face-to-face contact in universities? All of that will differ by type of institution and by different parts of the UK. But there are some fundamental challenges ahead. I'll stop there. I spoke for longer than I expected, and I do apologise slightly for that. Happy to take a few questions. I've got 5 minutes if you have. Your call, Simon.
Yeah, I think we should perhaps take 2 questions.
Yep, 2 questions. Who's going to... You choose them, Simon.
Okay. Any questions for you?
There may not be.
Great.
Yep.
Nigel.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi. I was thinking about new courses. You know the challenges we got at Aberystwyth, we probably too well.
Yep.
And I was thinking about whether new courses, you know, are they I suppose across the piece, but are they a gamble? Not courses, new subjects rather. Are they a gamble or are they something essential?
Well, good point. I mean, to use a very glib phrase, but it's good phrase, the trouble with universities is that for too long we've sold what we made, not made what we sold. In other words, this is the offer. Do you like it? You know, we are going through a massive cull of programs here. I won't bore you with the data, but there is a large number of master's courses that have under 5 students. So we go in and say to the academics, you know, this isn't a good use of your time. And they say, but it's my time, it's not, you know, I mean, there's a slight cultural issue here. So we look at the market data extremely clearly. We have 12 people employed who do data analysis. So we get printouts of all, I mean, this is too long an answer to go into. But what we do is we look at where students who apply to us per subject also apply, and we look at the grades, and we look at where we lose them to. We know exactly where we lose in each UCAS subject code, where the students go. And of course, there are some of our subjects that are stuck, have been stuck a little bit in the, this is the way we teach it. And what you see is if they're not prepared to adapt, they go the way of the dodo. So I think, firstly, absolutely, you've got to look at what's new. On the other hand, I think there's a danger, as you can appreciate, of being too trendy. So what we do is we look at where the students with the grades we're looking to get, where are they? And are we in those subjects? There's one we're not in, we're thinking about it. So it really is knowing both where demand is, getting the data to trace demand. You can see where demand is going, and then making sure that you've got provision. It's partly the course, but all the data shows that what matters most to students is a combination of the precise course, but also the institution strength. So the number one thing we spend our time doing is trying to strengthen the institution. Because what you find is people tend to want, in our bit of the market, a degree from Exeter more than they want this precise programme. But the bottom line, Nigel, the last bit of the answer, is the key to this is knowing where you are. And the danger, of course, is the psychologically reassuring, we know what we're doing speech that we tend to get from a lot of colleagues who don't look at the data. And to give you one nice example, we had one of our subjects, we had massive declines over the years in number of students coming. We couldn't work it out until we asked a simple question: how long does it take that subject to give a decision on a student's application? And we found the average that year was 179 days. So they were taking 6 months to answer, and what a surprise, they weren't getting the students.
Okay, I'd like to wrap that up. I'd like to just offer a vote of thanks to Professor Steve Smith for this morning's talk. Very wide-ranging, very interesting. I'm sure it's probably made a lot of us think within our own institutions and our own roles that there's a challenge there for us to rise here. So thanks very much for that,
pleasure.
Steve.
Good to see you.